get started, I think it always bears repeating when we're in John's Gospel to remember that this is not a Christian versus Jew story, that this is more of an us versus us kind of story. So don't hear that. And, John's Gospel is used for centuries for Christian anti-Semitism, so let's not go there. That's not what this is saying. So this is an us versus us fight. In about, I think it was 175 BC, that Antiochus IV, he ascended to the throne in Syria. And I'm sure, like every other newly crowned king, he had some big plans. Foremost, he wanted to extend his kingdom all the way to Egypt. But first, he needed to consolidate his power and his authority in the areas of his present rule, which included Israel. Now, one of the ways he wanted to consolidate his power and his authority was to make Israel looked a lot more like Greece, with Greek laws, Greek customs, Greek religion, while at the same time ruthlessly suppressing Judaism. And of course, the Jewish people resisted his efforts, but Antiochus found some support. He found some support from the Jewish aristocracy, as well as support from the religious leaders of the day. And Antiochus deposed the rightful high priest, whose name was Onias III, and sold the office. He sold the office to the highest bidder. And it was his younger brother, Onias' younger brother, Joshua.
Insider trading.
Yes, exactly. So, and Joshua, who, even in refuting his Jewish identity, he even changed his name to the Greek Jason. So clearly this Jason stopped following the God of Israel. He stopped listening for the call of God's voice. But Antiochus, in his effort to make Jerusalem much more like a Greek city, he built a gymnasium. And the Jewish men, as they participated in naked athletic events, somehow hid the fact that they were circumcised. Now, there are no accounts that I know of that explains exactly how they did that. But most importantly, I think it's for us to know that they disowned the sign. They disowned their covenant with God. They stopped following the God of Israel. They stopped listening for God's voice. And then Antiochus, who now has fashioned himself as Epiphanes, the manifest of God, decreed that all should worship Zeus, so that all the people, of course, would force them to try to forget their laws, to forget their unique relationship with God. He hoped that they would stop listening for the call of God's voice. Then a sacrifice to Zeus was offered in the temple on the new altar that was built on top of the altar that was used for the sacrifices to the God of Israel. And this was the last straw. Though Antiochus was able to win the loyalty of the aristocracy, he was able to turn many in the priesthood away from God. The desecration of the place where God dwelt among God's chosen people, that desecration showed that many had indeed stopped worshiping the God of Israel. They stopped listening for the call of God's voice. However, there were some who never stopped following God. There were some who never stopped listening for the call of God's voice. And these were the Maccabees. And the Maccabees, over the next few years, first through guerrilla warfare and then through full-scale military battles, they managed to defeat the more powerful Syrian armies in 164 BC. And the Maccabees were able to win Israel's independence from Syria. And the first thing that the Maccabees did was they recaptured Jerusalem was to rededicate the temple. The altar to Zeus was destroyed, and the temple was cleansed and refurbished. The altar to the God of Israel was rebuilt. And ever since then, the people of Israel have celebrated with an 8-day festival, which we often call Hanukkah, the Feast of the Dedication, which is going on today in John's Gospel. And Hanukkah has a few different meanings above and beyond the victory of the Maccabees and the restoration of the temple. The festival serves both to remind Israel of God's protection during its wandering in the wilderness. And the Feast of the Dedication serves as a reminder of the time when they fell into idolatry with sacrifices made to Zeus, when they hid their circumcision, when they disowned their covenant with God, when they stopped listening for the call of God's voice. And it's against this background, this festival of dedication, in memory of all the times when God's people ignored his call, it's against this background that here Jesus answered the question, are you the Messiah? Are you the Messiah? And Jesus says, I've told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me, but you do not believe because you do not belong to my sheep. So Jesus talks about sheep. Now, I hope he's saying more about the nature of God than about the nature of humans, but when you think about it, maybe we can be more like sheep than we would care to admit. Sheep who perhaps become easily distracted, become easily lost. Maybe like those who went along with Antiochus, like the ones who tried to hide their circumcision, to hide their covenant, hide their relationship with God. Maybe like the people who decided to worship Zeus instead. I think that Jesus is saying that yes, we can indeed become like sheep when we stop listening for his voice. But on this feast of the dedication, we must not forget that the shepherd is diligent. The shepherd has a lot of endurance. The shepherd has a lot of patience. That shepherd searches for green pastures and finds the still waters. The shepherd protects the sheep from the dangers of this world. And if any go missing, the shepherd finds them. What Jesus is saying, what he's saying is, hear my voice. Hear my voice and ask yourselves, in what ways are we like those who tried to hide our circumcision? How are you like those who worship Zeus? Have we stopped listening for God? Jesus then, as he is now on this Good Shepherd Sunday, and Jesus is asking each of us, do you hear my voice? Are you listening now? Amen.